Good morning. I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Questions. We're back at Shelfield Community Academy in Walsall to debate one very big question. Is there life after death? Welcome, everybody, to The Big Questions this morning. This week, the blockbuster American film Heaven is for Real was released over here. It's based on the true story of a 4-year-old boy, Colton Burpo, who survived a near-death experience during emergency surgery. The child later described to his parents how he had visited heaven, sat on the knee of Jesus, patted his multicoloured horse and caught sight of Mary, John the Baptist and Satan. But Colton also knew about things that had happened at home when he was struggling for life, and this convinced his pastor father that his son had gone to heaven and watched over them all. Now, he had experienced life after death. Well, to debate whether life after death is possible, we've assembled theologians from several faiths, people who have heard from dead people and dead animals, experts on death, psychologists, skeptics, atheists and former believers. You can join in too via Twitter or online. Just log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. Follow the links to where you can continue the discussion online. There'll be lots of encouragement, contributions from a very lively Walsall audience. Is there life after death? Dr Conor Cunningham, theology and philosophy, University of Nottingham. But let's talk about the soul first of all. There you are. What's a soul?
The soul is not what we tend to think, certainly in the Christian tradition, where we think of it as something I've got in my pocket, like a wallet, and that floats off to Florida, read heaven. Rather, it's the very possibility of the body at all. So for someone like St. Thomas Aquinas, the soul is the form of the body. That's how you recognise something, a giraffe, a tomato, a collar, different. And that's how we live our entire social lives. That's why we think someone killed someone, because they killed someone who had a form, a soul. It's actually, it's the Nicky soul, not the Conor soul. We're different.
Well, that's a body.
You might be a bit of a giraffe.
Body.
But
body. That's your body. That's
it's the body. There's no body without it.
Your corporeal form, as they put it.
Yeah, I mean, and the point here, I shouldn't jump ahead, but you do not have, because we think the soul as being something spiritual, it's not at all. The soul is the possibility of any body whatsoever. There aren't any bodies without a soul. It just happens that ours has a nature which is subsistent, which means by that its rationality, its ability to think, its to write from E = MC squared to Origin of Species to whatever, King Lear, it has the ability to transcend its corporeality. And this is one thing that people must remember, and Aquinas said this quite clearly. St. Thomas Aquinas said, the body is there to ennoble the soul. Whereas we in Western culture tend to think that the soul is there to ennoble the body.
Right.
The body enables the soul to be.
So what about, and more scientists are acknowledging this, what about the cognitive, the more sentient species, the ones closest to us, bonobos, chimpanzees, but also extraordinary elephants, their own self-awareness, their own cognition, their sense of self, their ability with, to plan ahead, episodic memory.
Absolutely.
Are we unique or not?
We are unique, but uniqueness has to be very, very careful. Anyone who wins the Premier League, Man City, is still part of the league. Yeah? They're still part of the league. Just so we're unique, we might win the Premier League, but it doesn't mean we're not playing the same game. We're still playing football. Right down at the bottom. Now, QPR have just got up yesterday.
Yeah. Well, so what, QPR dogs or something?
No, but it's
there's
like
kind of a league table.
Yeah, it's like I was saying. I mean, it's like that. The Jewish thinker Hans Jonas said that what we've forgotten is that from evolution we are connected to other animals, and everyone thought, boo.
Okay, so
but that's a bad thing. But no, it's not, because it means they're connected to us.
So everything has a soul, but humans have a slightly elevated form of soul. So then, at what stage in our journey from tree-dwelling apes to bipedal hunter-gatherers did we go, whoosh, right, there you go, you've got a special soul? At what stage?
Well,
Was it Homo erectus? Was it Homo ergaster?
Well,
was it Homo
anthropologically,
neanderthalis? What was it?
anthropologically, we all came from Africa, obviously, out of the Africa paradigm. And then when we got to Europe, we all went, hey, let's have a cappuccino. And suddenly there was a massive burst in our cerebral potential. So sort of 40,000 years ago.
So it was a gradual thing over
massive.
So the soul didn't appear all of a sudden. It gradually appeared.
No.
Chris French, does this make any sense to you whatsoever?
Well, I mean, in general terms, the idea that we've evolved from simpler species, perfect sense, absolutely.
Well, that's biological fact. But
that does raise that whole question of, for those people, and there are many of them, I don't think we've got one here, but there are many people who believe that humans are the only species with a soul, then obviously evolution is a problem. Because when did souls suddenly come into being? I mean, did they come along with the opposable thumb or what? How did it work? Yeah. And, I mean, again, in terms of whether or not we have souls, I mean, it all depends on how you define it. Now, for a lot of people, and again, I don't think we've got an example here, but for a lot of people, the soul is essentially kind of consciousness, but in some way it survives bodily death. Now, I don't have any problem at all in accepting that we all have consciousness, and I think we're a long way from understanding exactly how consciousness arose and how it works, etc., etc. But the idea that we have an immortal soul, a consciousness that survives bodily death, then I've got big problems with that.
We've got
May I just come back
consciousness.
No, you see, this is the point I disagree with. Because I think if we're going to be... So that we tend to think of the supernatural as something extra special. It's up here. It's that Florida holiday you always wanted, like the Willy Wonka ticket that you get to go to the chocolate factory, the gold ticket. And then the natural's just here. It's like the floor. It's like the shoes, like toenails and stuff. But the point is that any good atheist, philosopher, or scientist will tell you there isn't any consciousness. It's not, is there life after death? The big, big, big debate is there life before death? And I would argue, no, it's not about near-death experience. It's near life experience we want.
Yeah.
And I think that consciousness is completely wiped out without a theological framework, a metaphysical framework.
But Chris, I mean, there are 10 billion neurons in our brain, and they're connected through the neurotransmitters. They have 1,000 connections, each of them. It's mind-boggling how the mind boggles, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Is that consciousness?
Well, I mean, again,
in there.
What the nature of consciousness is something that philosophers have debated for centuries, and they still are debating. I mean, it's referred to in philosophy as the hard problem. How could it be that subjective self-awareness can arise? Something that seems to be, whether it is or not, this is a debate, something different to this physical body, this physical brain. How can one arise from the other? It's called the hard problem in philosophy for a very good reason, because nobody's solved it yet. And I personally don't think that a theological framework actually helps us very much.
Well, Rev Dr Andrew Pinsent, wait, I will be back.
David Chalmers who coined the hard problem.
The hard problem.
Yeah.
Let's spread the love.
So,
Rev Dr Andrew Pinsent, the hard problem. Solve it for us.
Okay,
because you know the complexity of the brain, it could be one of those God of the gaps things, something we just do not yet understand.
Now I just agree with Dr Cunningham about this idea of the soul. Originally it meant organising principle or living principle, or animating principle. We use the same word for the word animal, in fact. And the ancient Greeks saw there's a great difference between the matter that's dead and the matter that's living. Even though the matter is almost exactly the same, the animating principle is not there in the case of the dead being. But what the Greeks also suggested is that human souls are different because we have the ability to step outside the flow of time. We have the ability to understand ideas, concepts, abstractions, numbers, and so on. They said there must be something rather special about the human soul. So even before consideration in Christian theology, for example, people in ancient Greece were already thinking that there must be something immortal about this special kind of human soul. And just add about the uniqueness about...
Can I just refer you, before you do that, to the previous... Chris's previous point. At what stage in the ascent of man, in our progress to become bipedal apes and the primates that we are now, the very bright primates, did we get this soul?
Okay, I think there's a fallacy here, because people sometimes think with complex systems that you change the inputs continuously and you've got a change of output that's continuous. But imagine another situation. Imagine if you raise the Earth's temperature, suddenly the Gulf Stream might switch off, for example. Now, something like that might happen with complex systems like living systems. You have a certain number of changes accumulated. And suddenly you get a change of state, like a phase, like ice melting or something. And the capacities that human beings have seem to be different in kind, not just in degree. So Chesterton said, a bird builds a nest, doesn't build a nest in the Gothic style. We don't see ants building statues of famous ants.
But what about the more self-aware animals, which I mean, there's extraordinary scientific work.
I think certainly animals, and it's interesting you cite the example of elephants. We think elephants can point.
They grieve.
Very, very sophisticated, grieve perhaps, yes. Certainly animals get... there are some animals that seem to get towards some of these capacities, but nevertheless, what human beings do seems to be different in degree, and it's
killing
like a kind
each
of
other by the
explosion,
million.
like a, good and bad, you know. But there's an explosion of potential.
Chris French.
I think it is that question. I think it is that question of it's a matter of degree. We're talking about a kind of continuum here, and so the notion that you either do have consciousness or you don't, or you do have a soul or you don't,
Actually,
I think is a fallacy.
So
it's an emergent property, and so therefore to say that there's nothing in terms of all of the things that you mentioned there, counting, planning, all these other things, even language, debatably. Animals do demonstrate these things, and you know, we're realising more and more about the cognitive abilities of animals, and there's nothing you can really point to that says, oh, this is something that only humans have got. And so I think it's a fallacy.
Jackie, you speak to animals, don't you?
Absolutely, and I'm
Spoke
just...
to me earlier.
I'm just
You have your moments,
amazed that people can think that only humans have cognitive thinking, only humans have the soul that have emotions, and that we should be above.
Scientists no longer say that, but we're talking about the soul. You believe animals have soul.
And
but you do communicate. You say you communicate with animals.
Absolutely, but we're talking about how they think, and as Chris was saying, they can do absolutely amazing things. Same with elephants. They can travel for miles. There was a story about a man that had died that had saved some elephants. They tracked, found his grave and stood there, and that was all recorded.
Lawrence Anthony.
Yeah, and they do absolutely amazing things, and it's beyond my understanding to think that people think they're like robots or they just do because they do. They're on the same level but unique. They're different. An animal is an animal, but they think and do amazing things.
What do they say to you?
Oh, they have problems. It's like horses. Horses get problems. So therefore, if you think of it, a horse is a big animal. If they didn't want us to ride them and compete and jump and stuff, they can just say no. And some do. So they have problems. When we talk to an animal, they can actually understand what we say. And sometimes there's problems where they don't understand. They have misconceptions about things, the same as children do. And then you'll get, say, an animal that's been abused by somebody. And people all know this. Animals get seriously abused, yet they go to another home, and with love and care, people can actually turn that animal around. And not just to be, oh, you know, I'll have a biscuit. Look at the cat the other day that attacked a dog to save that child. Now,
well, empathy is more and more observed, isn't it? But what can you talk to? Have you talked to dead animals?
Absolutely. This is this is basically. I think.
You see, some people will scoff.
Oh, absolutely. But this, to me, our bodies are just energy. And if I can talk about the energy field, NASA invented a machine to measure auras. And so, therefore, they're measuring our energy field. And even if there's been done, a man had a leg amputated, it still showed up in his picture. This is our soul, our core. So when we leave this physical body, then, yes, they go to spirit. And I don't just, you know, there's lots of people who do my job. You talk to them, you tell them stuff they only know about their animals. I wouldn't know the animals, but I can tell them stuff that animal shared with them when they were living.
You're looking a bit sceptical, Chris.
I'm looking very sceptical indeed.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Jackie.
No problem at all.
Even more so.
Would you be as sceptical with any other belief system, whether they spoke about, you know, virgin births or resurrections?
Personally, yes.
Not on night flights to wherever. I mean, are you equally sceptical? Are you equivalently sceptical of all?
So no religion would exist.
You're an equal opportunity skeptic.
Exactly. Yeah, I am an equal. Yes, yeah. I'm an atheist. You know. I mean, the thing is that, you know, we get a lot of these kind of claims. As far as I'm aware, I mean, please do send me the details if I'm wrong, Jackie. NASA have not got a machine that measures auras. There are lots of claims related to these kind of things like Curlian photography, etc. It can all be explained in terms of conventional physics and chemistry. But I mean, these are claims that we can actually put to the test, and indeed I spend a lot of my time. But well, the idea that animals, that Jackie can actually read animals' minds, we could put that to the test. I've tested lots of psychics with lots of claims under properly controlled conditions, and they don't seem to be able to do what they think they can do.
Jackie?
It's interesting you use the word supernatural, okay? It is supernatural, super as in very natural. But it's like exams. Yeah, somebody goes for an exam, they can be cracking at school, but you put in an exam under pressure and it's like, ooh, this is harder. And I know you say that, but why don't you say, just follow, say, 10 psychics' work, follow what they do. I've changed animals that have been going to be put to sleep and stuff.
Can I take you back to what we're discussing, which is the basic point, that you actually theoretically in agreement, because if there is such a thing as a soul, you're closer to Jackie's position.
Well, I wouldn't deny
animal
consciousness. I wouldn't deny animal consciousness. Again, I mean, it depends how you want to define the soul. Personally, I don't find it a very useful concept, and I certainly don't believe in the immortality of souls.
Right. Let's get the Muslim perspective. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You're a cardiologist and also an imam. And yes, it's Mr. Hamed, isn't it?
Dr. Hamed, yes.
Dr. Hamed, I do beg your pardon. What is a soul, and where do the souls come from?
Yeah, commenting on the soul in Islamic belief, which is part of the monotheism, all the believe in one God, is that it's part of God. Now, the soul, animals who do have souls, but they are different from humans. That's why in the Quran there is a verse, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We dignified the human beings. So human beings have been dignified by God to have the willing to do things, unlike other souls, which you can communicate with them, you can feel that your animal, whether it's a horse or a camel or whatever, feel your emotion. So that's different. But the soul of human beings is quite different, and there is a difference between, also from concept of medicine, between brain and mind. And that's the philosophy, what the philosophy talk about. There is quite a difference between that. All animals have brain, but they don't have a mind.
See, this is the... There are animals, being a medical man, you'll appreciate there are animals which have cognition, and also they think some have metacognition.
Yes, yeah, they have.
They not only know they're an animal, they know they're an animal, which is metacognition.
Yeah.
So there are animals with self-awareness. It's a spectrum. But you think it's animals...
Yeah, as I'm saying, they differ. Their cognition is different from the cognition of human beings.
That's what you believe.
That's higher level.
So scientists may disagree with you, but that's what you believe, and that's fine. So what about souls? Where do they come from, and how are they handed out? From
Islamic perspective, it's all come from God, and usually the human being created as a small flesh in the womb of the woman, and then after certain periods, usually around 120 days.
The souls pre-exist.
But the soul pre-exists from God. Everything God created and there, but it will come to that body, to that flesh in that time. It's 120 days.
So where are the souls right now that have not yet come to flesh and come to bodies? Where are they now? Are they in a special place?
There is a verse of Quran I say, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتِهِمْ. The translation is that God take our oath from before we existed, that you recognize that there is one God, and that's the place of mercy to everything, to whole universe. And then everybody accepted that. And that's why we all, as a human, whether you are a humanist, atheist, at certain times when the plane crash or with something had difficulty or have a divorce, then we all come back to our source of love, God. Whether we believe in it before or not, that will come us nearer to that.
Again, Chris, you're looking agitated.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I don't agree. I mean, there is this statement, no atheists in foxholes. It's just not true. I mean, I know lots of atheists and humanists who've gone through very difficult times, and they don't resort to praying to God. They just don't believe that there is such a thing. There's no point.
Deborah, I'm so sorry not to have come to you sooner, because I see you've been moving around in your seat. You want to come in. So, the soul, what's it? Is there anything more, anything greater, anything that transcends the sum of the parts of the neurons and axons and dendrites and neurotransmitters?
I think the first thing that we've got from what we've got so far is that you've got to start with your definitions very, very carefully. And the colloquial definition of a soul starts with a personality and a character, a consciousness, and something that can last after death. So that's a very colloquial definition, and it's not the definition that Conor started with. So, you know, if you're going to believe in something like that, it's frankly quite hard. We'd all like to. I mean, I'm a total atheist, but I would like to. Why wouldn't I want to last? I just don't think that the evidence is particularly compelling.
But Mark Twain said something like, I've been I've been dead. I was dead for billions of years before I was born, and it didn't trouble me in the slightest.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, is that it's just an inbuilt preference of ours. It's the way we look at the world. It must be the single hardest thing to escape, is the thought that we have our perspective. You know, this is me looking at things and interpreting things and talking to you. It's very difficult to imagine this without me as a witness in the middle of it, and I think that's the failure.
Well, let's get a Buddhist perspective on this from the Venerable Choesang. Good morning.
Good morning.
Senior nun of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
For you, the soul is on a journey, isn't it? Through many lives.
Yes, when we don't refer to it as a soul, although I would use that when I'm talking within a Western society.
For the purposes of...
We talk about it being an essence of mind, and that essence of mind is what's released from the body on death and goes forward to the next life. So all sentient beings have an essence of mind, and that essence of mind grows with a cognitive ability, depending on what type of animal they are. So like, you wouldn't go from an insect to a human, perhaps, but once you've been a human, you probably wouldn't go back to being an insect, although you could travel backwards a little in which animal you're going to be. So we see all sentient beings as being very precious, that they all have that essence of mind. And the Tibetans actually studied for over 1,000 years over the mind rather than on the reaction with the body, and came up with the fact that the mind is everywhere. It's in every cell of your body, and scientists now are actually proving that one. And so the brain is just like the motherboard that puts the thought into action. But your essence of mind is throughout your body, and it gathers at the point of death and then leaves your body at some point after the heart has stopped beating.
And you believe that what we are now is dictated by what we have done previously in a previous life?
Yes,
right.
Yeah, and earlier in this life.
What about your own situation? Because you've had illness in your life.
Yes.
Have you considered why that was?
Yes, it really helped me to understand, actually, because rather than be thinking that somebody out there defined how my life was going to be, to understand Buddhism and realise that I was in control of my life, and the fact that I was born with a disability, and I've met mothers that have been born with a disability, knowing that it comes from a previous karma is actually much more acceptable than that there's a God figure out there defining that that's going to be my life. Was it your fault? No, it's just the culmination of a previous life. So I'm no longer responsible for how I behaved in a previous life, but at that time I was responsible. Right. Oh, so now it's a question. Are you a changed essence of person or essence of human? But you're the same essence. Yes. Your main propensities will go forward. Like you see some children, they'll be only 18 months old and they'll go stamping on animals and they're always angry. And then you get others that want to mother everything when they're, and you see babies that are born with the wisdom of ages. So you see this essence of mind that's come forward from a previous life. Deborah.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, we can end up imbuing other people's characters, especially when they're very tiny, with specific characteristics and bringing those things out. And however you choose to find the comfort in your own life is, of course, your own business. But the belief in predestination, in karma and reincarnation, things like that, can sometimes be downright offensive. I have a friend who has very, very bad cerebral palsy. She's an atheist, but she has family members who are Hindu, and they believe in some way she's deserved this. They think it's okay, and they don't want to listen to her whining. Yes, we'd say we wouldn't use words like "you deserve it." It's a culmination of previous karma.
Have you got any idea? Is it possible to get any inkling, any glimpse of previous life? Can you find out? Yes, when you become more of a senior practitioner, your past lives do start bouncing in. Have yours bounced in? We all see this, don't we? You have a déjà vu moment, and we say that's because you've recognised a place or you've recognised a person from a previous life. And yes, they do start coming, not in order. They just come bouncing through when you're doing your other practice.
Lots of bits of evidence are put forward by people who believe in reincarnation. Déjà vu being one example. Apparently retrieving past lives through hypnotic regression, all kinds of other things. All of these can be explained much more plausibly with a lot of evidence to support it in terms of what we know about
so when you see
neuroscience and human psychology.
Are you telling us that when you see somebody, you think, I've seen this person before, I know this person from somewhere, it's not because you knew them in a previous life?
I'm saying exactly that, yes. I mean, you know, we know, for example, that what's happening in the temporal lobes of the brain can sometimes give you that feeling of déjà vu, that feeling that you've recognised this person even though you don't. And certainly with respect to kind of memories of past lives, there's absolutely no doubt at all in my mind that we are dealing with false memories there. They may feel very real, but they're actually not.
Just one, Gail, I want to come to you in a second.
I've actually investigated
Venerable
two
Choesang,
young children that have come out with previous lives that they've had, which no way they could have had that information.
What was the information?
One was that he was a water carrier in India and explained about his bicycle and how his legs became bent, and he explained what the carrier looked like and what his village was like. He was 4 years old. And then another one was, even at 2.5, this little girl was talking football to her father and maintained that she could drive a car, and she'd crashed her previous car.
And what glimpses have you had into your previous lives since you're quite, spiritually advanced?
I've come up with some previous lives, and one of them, a particular Tibetan life, has actually been proven by the High Lamas, but it's not something we actually discuss openly with people, just within our own groupings.
Interesting to get a sense of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gail, you've been, Gail Millington, good morning, you're a past life regression therapist.
Yes.
So this part of our conversation is absolutely for you.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
could see you wanted to come in. And your husband, I believe, you've been married to him in previous lives as well.
Yes.
So was I.
So were you what?
I was married to him as well, but the one before.
That's quite a revelation.
Well, I think it's quite easy to be very flippant about this.
Yes, Conor, back in your box. So, but how do you know that you knew him before in previous lives? 4 times, I believe. How do you know that?
Well, because of being regressed myself. And I think that certainly with doing regressions with other people as well, I mean, I'm not in total agreement with what the previous speaker mentioned in terms of karma, because I believe that there's nobody judges us other than ourselves when we pass over to the other side, and that we decide when we reincarnate what lessons we want to learn from the forthcoming incarnation. So my concept of the soul would be the immortal essence that goes from one incarnation to another.
It's not that far away from what the Venerable Choesang was
No,
saying.
it isn't too far away. But I don't believe that it's karmic why the lady has found herself in ill health. I think that she has chosen that to enable her to do what she does now. She's been brought to this point in time, and perhaps doing what she does in terms of her Buddhist belief. As a result of the disability.
In your previous life, I'll come back to Venerable Choesang in a second.
Yeah.
Just explore this a little bit more, if I may. What were you in a previous life? Were you sometimes a man, and was your husband a woman?
Well, most of the time it was as it is at the moment.
Right, but there has been difference.
But there has been differences. But yes, I mean, times as a shaman, times when various other scenarios.
Are you the same person? You were a shaman, were you?
Yes, in one life.
Are
yeah.
you the same person as the person who was a shaman? When was
no,
this?
that was a soul progression. The
same soul,
progresses.
but not the same person.
No, absolutely.
When were you a shaman?
Hundreds of years ago.
Hundreds of years ago, yeah.
Hundreds of years ago.
But
yeah.
do you know when specifically?
I can't remember when it was, to be honest.
No.
But it was hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
But there's no linear time. I mean, when you're doing regressions, you can go back to any particular life that's going to help you specifically in your current life now. So you don't go back to a specific. It's, I believe, the higher self that chooses the life that you need to go back to, which is going to be most beneficial to help you now.
Deborah.
For what it's worth, and I can assure you it is worth a lot, I'm a qualified hypnotherapist. Quick course while I had nothing else to do. And it was fascinating. It's good for anxiety, that's about all. And one of the most amazing things about hypnosis is just how it really frees your imagination. If you can let yourself go with it, you can come up with the most amazing things, and you can come up with something that's historically plausible, like you're a Viking raider, or you can come up with something completely bizarre, as that you were on an alien spacecraft. So that by itself, having a peculiar experience under a hypnotic trance, is not at all bizarre. It's totally predictable.
what you typically find is that the stories that people come up with, the narratives, and they've got all the images in their heads that make it seem very, very real.
So it's sincere.
But it's sincere, totally sincere. But it corresponds to the Hollywood version of life in ancient Rome or whatever else, or wherever it may be. It's not the historically accurate version.
But, go
it's
on.
fantasy.
I think there is an awful lot of supporting evidence that's been done specifically by Dr Ian Stevenson, for example, where he's actually researched quite specific cases of reincarnation. And nobody's going to give you absolutely concrete proof that this is the case, but there is a growing raft of evidence.
But you've communicated with or been in the presence of people who've spoken to dead people.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
What are they saying? What are the dead people saying? What's their general message? What's their message?
It's very specific to the person concerned. There isn't a general message. It's very specific for a specific person.
Right, we're going to talk about life after death soon, but is there an unpleasant place and a pleasant place, or is it all fine after?
No, I don't believe there's such a place as hell.
So it's all kind of, what's it like? Jackie, what's it like? What are the dogs telling you about what's it like?
To me, it's just your energy is free. And yes, we do get some visual stuff, but what I would say is talk about general message is they give, it's like you hadn't seen somebody say for 20 years, and someone goes, here, have a phone, talk to them. Okay, yeah, the information, you have to work it out, but at the end of the day, they will tell you stuff about you, about them, things you shared, and that's where evidence comes in, rather than just like, oh, you know, they say hi.
Manoher, good morning. Hi. So what about does anything chime with you about the journey of the soul that you've heard so far?
Not entirely. I mean, my biggest question really would be, given that memories, we can map memories to brain function and stuff, so it's a very physical thing. I'd be curious, and as well as language, communication and stuff, I'd be curious as to know exactly how something that was immaterial had memory and also could communicate. That would be my biggest question about any of this.
What is the Sikh belief about the journey of the soul?
So,
are you a believer?
Am I a believer? I'm very much a religious person, but however, the assumptions would be that all religions are set up in the same way with their beliefs, so that there is something physical and then there is something non-physical that is the soul. And that a soul then migrates and carries karma and stuff. This is the impression that people generally have of Eastern religions. I think the place to start with Sikhism would be that you start with a closed system and make the assumption that everything is divine, whether it's material or immaterial. And that anything that is living, or, well, given then everything is divine, there is no soul to be moved on from here to there or anywhere else. There are cycles of birth and death. Well, we know that. There are multiple types of existence, multiple types of animals and plants and that have evolved over time. So that isn't problematic. Is more interesting from a Sikh perspective is what any theory you have about the soul or consciousness, what it does ethically. So if you make the assumption that one type of animal has a more elevated soul or a consciousness than another, does that then lead you to behave differently towards that animal?
Well, there used to be views, didn't there, in previous times, that one race had a superior type of soul to another.
Indeed.
So there is a kind of a road to hell on that one, isn't there? Any thoughts from the audience while we're on it, on souls? Right in the centre. While we're on souls.
On souls, well, I find it quite interesting,
quick points,
the aspect of the indestructible aspect of the soul. Is it in the brain? Is it in the mind? People who've had brain injuries, it's also affected their mind as well. Is it in the heart? Say if somebody's had a heart attack or a heart transplant, does that mean that their soul has moved on as well? So I think we have to be very careful, and concepts such as karma and rebirth, I mean, it can be quite offensive for many people who have been oppressed for generations, political elites that have used them and said, well, actually, you're in the state that you're suffering because of what you've done in the past. So I think we have to be careful there.
Thank you. And gentleman just back there, hello. Good morning.
Hi. There was Phineas P. Gage, who a while ago in the 19th century, there was a rock mining accident and then a pipe went through his head and it destroyed most of his left frontal lobe. Well, this, changes personality, and people who thought before he was a nice and kind person found that he was, aggressive and mean to people. Surely this, kind of takes us away from the fact that the soul is what is your personality.
It's biochemistry.
It's back to biochemistry.
Back to biochemistry. What about life after death? Andrew Pinsent, what happens? Is there such a thing as hell?
Okay. I think the best way of describing it, C.S. Lewis summed up in just one short phrase. He said, in this life, we write the title page of what we are to be in eternity. And the thing about... One thing, say, a Christian and an atheist would agree about, when we leave this life, we cease to change. That becomes the pattern of our eternity. As to whether or not we have another life or not, I think we really have to draw, for the most part, on revelation. Of course, as a Christian, there's all kinds of additional information on this. You know, we've got the continuity of the personality of Christ, the resurrection, you know, that he knows his friends. You've got also the sense of a life, ultimately an embodied life, actually, ultimately an embodied life.
Embodied? We have our physical bodies?
Eventually.
At what stage in our life?
In terms of the resurrection of the dead.
When we're 30, when we're 20, when we're 40, what stage?
Well, actually, there are differences of view on that, so I wouldn't want to give a definitive suggestion. But there's some sense in which we were meant to be body and soul. We created body and soul, and you know, if there is a God and a loving God, and God wants us to be body and soul eventually in some kind of new existence. But in this life, we write the title page of what we are to be in eternity.
Is it not a very anthropocentric view to say, and looking at the world through human eyes, to say we will be reunited with our bodies? Isn't that almost a kind of, you know, a medieval version, an attempt to understand, an attempt at solace, an attempt at consolation? For many, it's just an utterly ridiculous concept.
Well, I mean, what other eyes can we look through except our own eyes? The question that doesn't
you reunited with our bodies. I mean, the very
invalid.
question about our bodies when we were 15, our bodies. Well, I'll have one when I was 21, I think.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll give you the view. Thomas Aquinas on this point thought we ought to be about 30 years old, because that's when Christ. That's about roughly the time that Christ died, for example.
Did he have a divine revelation, or was he just a philosopher writing and working it out as he went along?
He suggested it as a possibility. It's not as a probable thing.
But it wasn't
the issue raised by this gentleman here, that, I mean, supposing someone suffers some form of brain damage that completely changes their personality.
Hippocampus is damaged, isn't it?
Exactly. Before the age of 30, does that mean that that's the version of them that goes on to the afterlife? Again, it just doesn't really make sense. It's arbitrary. It's about trying to make out we are God's special creation, and really evolution knocked that on the head. The theory of evolution knocked that on the head.
Yeah, Conor, and then Pete.
I just disagree. First of all, I think that story is no longer true, but there's actually better versions of that.
Which story?
The Phineas, the pull for the head.
But if your hippocampus is damaged, your personality changes.
No, they actually don't know. But the better one is actually the guy who became a paedophile through a tumour in his brain in Texas, and they took it out, and then he was fine again, and it grew back again, and he went back to paedophilia. So that's a better classical example. I think the thing we're doing here is, I still think we're doing the natural-supernatural thing too much. And I think that if atheism is true, materialist reductionism is the case, fair dues. That's absolutely fair dues. But if that's the case, there are no atheists. It's as bad as me thinking that Nicky, whose body I saw 2 years ago, clothed, 2 years ago, is completely different. Molecular turnover. You're completely different. You're already resurrected in that sense. But we still call you Nicky. So how are we doing that? It's form.
It's regeneration.
And that's why we hold people accountable for crimes. Yeah. Hitler, genocide, rape, paedophile.
But the memories are still there.
Yeah.
The old memories, the new memories, and the memories that are formed.
But that's because of form.
That's continuity.
Yeah, but the point is, what they call HADD, hyper agency device, identity device, something like that, where we make false positives, like you and your lover sitting on a summer's day looking up the sky and seeing clouds and think, oh, that looks a bit like a horse. That looks a bit like Isle of Wight. That looks a bit like... But it's not, is it? We're doing it by looking at each other thinking, what's your name? Chris. I'm making a false positive and thinking it's Chris. It's not true. Because Chris is simply a material aggregation which has new form.
But he's called
Doesn't
Chris.
exist.
Pete, do we spend too much time... Or what about this? It's very persuasive, isn't it? This idea. It's a very powerful idea. It's a very consoling idea. The idea that we go on, we see our loved ones again, we see our dog again. I'd love to see the dog that died when I was 11 years old. I still get weepy when I think about that dog. We're going to see him. It's persuasive, isn't it? Can I have a word later on?
Yes, give us his name.
It's persuasive, isn't it?
There is. I mean, I just think there's something about it that it's comforting and consoling. The sense that everything stops at the grave is actually quite terrifying for both those who are saying farewell to relatives and also when people reach the end of their lives. You definitely have a sense that, is this it? I hope there's something more than this. And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I don't think in the end we are ever going to come up with an answer this side of wherever it is. There's a lovely Talmudic story which says that just before a baby is born, an angel takes this baby and shows it the entire secrets of the universe, then places his finger on the baby's lips, and the baby forgets everything. And we then spend the rest of our lives remembering. And we're not doing a very good job, let's be honest. But
a couple of comments, and I'll come back to you. Yeah, got the back. Hi. No, you go first, so we've got the microphone.
Oh, sorry. And I really do sort of agree with that in the sense of, I mean, I work in a hospice where I've seen many patients deteriorate and die. And going back to what you said as well about, you know, when people are backed into a sort of corner, you could say that they turn to religion. That's not true. A lot of people are very, very upfront about it. You know, I'm going to die. I don't believe that there's anything after
fine
death.
About it,
yeah, and in fact, some people who have been religious for their entire lives, for years and years and years, will then renounce their faith, and I've seen that happen as well. So it can, you know, when you're in that situation, some people actually do consistently stay atheists.
And at the back, hello. Quick point.
I think it's been well established in neuroscience for a long time that when you damage certain parts of the brain, you lose certain abilities of the mind. So if you damage the prefrontal cortex, you lose the ability to feel compassion for people. For example, in philosophy, this is called the causal argument. But what's being said, although no one said it directly, is that a complete destruction of the brain at death, that the kind of cognitive faculties stay intact, rise off the brain and live on for all eternity, which to me poses even more difficult questions than it seems to answer.
I mean, Pete, interesting points from both
the
our
whole
contributors there. But you can understand, I mean, as I say, it's a seductive idea, isn't it? You can understand, for example, how Christianity really took off.
in Roman times, which was when Christianity began, the Jews, and of course Jesus was a Jew as well, were having a particularly tough time under the Romans, who were oppressing them and persecuting them and killing them quite randomly. And yet the rabbis, who were the ones who would bring the Judaism into the world as we currently know it 2,000 years ago, were continuing to insist that the people carry out these various commandments, and the more commandments they observed, the more God would be pleased with them and all would go well. And this kind of was not a very persuasive argument, because evidence was clearly to the contrary. Things were not going well. The Romans were giving the Jews a very difficult time, and nothing that they did made any difference. And the Jews complained to their rabbis, because we're very good at complaining, and said, you know, why are we doing this stuff if it isn't working? So the rabbis said, okay, well, there'll be a life after death, and it'll all be better in that one. And that was where the whole concept of life after death emerged.
And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to why it emerged, because Professor Tony Walter, Death Studies, Bath University, it's really interesting relating different cultures, different periods of time with what people believed and why they believed it. Give us some examples.
Yeah, I mean, just take something like belief in hell, which is distinctly out of fashion nowadays. In the Middle Ages...
for some of the people who appear on this programme, I have to say.
Yes. But in the Middle Ages, probably more people did believe in everlasting flames for ordinary sins. But that was a time when you could be hung for stealing a sheep, but not any sheep. If it was the Lord of the Manor's sheep, then you'd be hung. The point was, the size of the punishment in the medieval system was actually not dependent on the size of the crime, but on the status of the person you'd offended against. So minor sins against an almighty God merited actually eternal damnation. So in that legal system, then it was plausible. But once you move to modern legal systems, where the punishment fits the crime, as it were, then that notion of eternal damnation doesn't make any sense anymore. So you get a kind of relationship between legal systems and what people think about life after death.
And also tribal systems. Surely, if we're talking about the desert tribes of the 7th, 8th century, or 2,000 years ago, you can understand sort of patriarchal reasons for what they were saying and why they were saying it.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, what people believe about life after death depends on all sorts of things. Partly what they've been taught, but also, as you've just described, very specific historical circumstances, but also very specific personal circumstances. And I think it's not necessarily the most helpful way to see afterlife beliefs as a way of coping with bereavement. I mean, people who are grieving very often have a very clear sense of an ongoing relationship between them and the person who's died. And actually, some of the things they say about what happens after death is actually a way of articulating those relationships. So, I mean, whether you believe those relationships to have some kind of spiritual existence or not is a question, obviously.
Dr Amer Hamed, let me talk about hell.
Yeah.
Can I talk about it as we move on?
I'll tell you about hell.
I have to set the agenda because
Yeah, no,
I know how long we've got.
Does it make sense what you told him, that there's 11 billion cells in our brain and we still think that there's no God? Does it make sense that we in any school now, or any judge, you want to, whatever, you be Hitler-like and somebody who's saint-like and everything is fine? There shouldn't be a God.
Okay, hell. Okay, well, that's
and that's the concept of
life
hell.
after death, or you know, life before death. Is hell is very graphically described in the Quran, isn't it? You know, women
it is precisely described the same number, the hell and heaven. So it's fair.
Women hanging from their breasts if they've committed adultery, but also heaven as well.
This is a misconception. Now, there is always...
disabuse me of it.
No, adultery can be punishable for men and women. That's not only for men, women.
But people are hung by...
misconception about special Islam, that Islam punishes women only. It's not...
No, I'm talking about one example. Are women hung from their breasts or not?
No, people can be punished. People can be punished different.
Okay, you've got to eat devil's heads as well.
Yeah, men can be punished also.
Yeah, I know. I never said they couldn't. But you've got to eat devil's heads, and it's all very graphic. It's all very horrible. It sounds to many people.
But it's also a very pleasant life that you have rivers of wine. You have rivers of
alcoholic wine.
Alcoholic, but it will not give you the effect of alcohol.
Well, what's the point of having alcoholic?
The point is that God, that's what the concept. God asks you not to do something, and that's what you have done.
All right.
So you
Can I ask you something?
God,
Can I ask you something? So it says that you will be served by dark-eyed maidens and youths, yeah?
Somebody like people who are serving you, like a servant, like anybody who's wealthy, and you will go and find many people serving you.
So people are serving you?
Yeah.
Well, what about them? I mean, can't they enjoy the rivers of wine? Why do they have to spend their time serving people who are enjoying the rivers?
I know, but as you know now, what's the difference between us and animals? Let's come back to why we are human beings and these are animals. From an Islamic concept.
Why was it youths and dark-eyed maidens? That's a kind of, I'm sorry to say it, but there's something very seductive about that for some people, and it's playing on very earthly desires, if you don't mind me saying so.
Look, God gave us the will to come this wall and to do whatever we like, obey and disobey. And that's the difference between us and animals and other creatures. They do have a soul, but the soul is different from us. We have a higher level of soul. I
wasn't asking that.
Yeah. So in hell...
I was asking about the earthly desires, and it's in the Christian heaven as well. Yeah. Chris French, do you know what I mean? Let me move to Chris. Do you know what I mean here?
Well, exactly, yeah. I mean, you've got... you know, sadly, I hate to point this out, but I mean, it's beliefs like that lead people to drive jet planes into skyscrapers. You know, you won't get that happening from an atheist. I mean,
look, you know, point of order. But it's human. You get it happening. You know, human beings are responsible for whatever their beliefs. But this whole idea of, you know, the portrayal of heaven and hell in the terms which the people at which the portrayal is aimed would understand.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I think it goes back to the point that's been made over here. It depends on the kind of specific historical context, the way that these ideas are put out. It's not to say that they're deliberately made up, but they fit their times, certainly.
Yeah.
So that if you look back at the way that hell was portrayed in earlier centuries, then it was a useful means for people to actually probably avoid getting hooked.
Deborah.
I think it was brilliant that Rabbi Pete brought up the point that I think probably not a lot of people know that sort of many thousands of years before that, the Jewish religion wasn't particularly preoccupied with the afterlife. It kind of happened, and it happened at the same time as Christianity. And in if you look at, say, the story of Odysseus, when he went and he had to seek the wisdom of Tiresias, who had already died. So Odysseus had to go to the underworld to speak to him, and he had to give him a sacrifice of blood so that he could drink the blood, drink the life in effect, to even be able to speak. Hell was a very miserable place. It was a very dark place, full of shades, and they were just shuffling around. So you can see with each culture that their hell very much corresponds to their current ideas. As you said, it's sort of...
So in our current idea of heaven, there would be no mobile phones. something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to...
If other images weren't too ingrained. What about, if I may move on, what about near-death experiences? Ken, you've looked into this, haven't you? And you work in a hospital.
Indeed, yes. We've been conducting some research which is due for publication imminently, and it's very interesting to hear the various philosophical perspectives. Of course, from a scientific angle, we aren't particularly troubled by those varying views. What we're trying to discover, of course, is something about the brain and the mind and consciousness, with a perspective of trying to address some of the failures that we have when we recover people from cardiac arrest. There's a small but unfortunate percentage of those individuals who have a modicum of brain damage. Of course, part of our inquiry is to try and understand what's going on at cellular level, so that we can bring into being appropriate interventions, medical interventions, such as therapeutic hypothermia.
So what do people think is happening? They think they're floating above themselves? I mean, what sort of things have they described?
About 1 in 10 patients who recover are able to describe feelings of otherworldliness, of having a consciousness whilst they're clinically dead. And I'd like to make the point, some folks get cardiac arrest mixed up with heart attack. What we're talking about here are people who are dead. Their heart has stopped, their breathing has stopped, and if you measure their brain activity, they flatline on their brain too. That we obviously, and so unless they have an advance directive, such as a do not attempt CPR order in their medical notes, we will attempt to resuscitate them.
So what do they say about what has happened?
What they say is that they have a very positive feeling, they feel spiritually uplifted. All of the people that I spoke to who gave accounts of that were very positive about it, and it was otherworldly is the best words I can use. They wanted to go back there. One particular gentleman was absolutely desperate to go back there. He was euphoric about it.
Has anyone had an experience like this? Has anyone? You have?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I have. Many years ago in my teens, the short version is, in my teens, I had an exploded appendix. I went in for an operation, and I remember a dream, a very specific dream, that felt, to this day, like reality. If I close my eyes, I can see where I was. I officially flatlined. I officially died. Somehow they managed to get me back to life. The dream, the short version is, I was what seemed like a place that was burning with people screaming, lots of sort of faces of anger and sort of trying to grab at me, and something or someone that was bright and shiny came towards me, held my arm. I can remember these words so clearly, "Come with me." And I remember being taken away. I woke up. I do believe now in a God that cares. I believe that actually happened. I can't explain where I was. I believe it. I really do. I believe for some reason I was brought back to life, and I realise that some of the ladies and gents on this front row will probably dismiss this.
No, but I think they believe that you believe it.
Yeah. I believe it. I think it actually happened.
Yeah.
Can I just say something that...
Conor.
Sorry, yeah.
OK, Jackie.
On your studies, on just looking again as what is evidence, have you had people that have flatlined but then actually told you what has been going on in the physical around them, in the hospital, things that have happened?
Have you had that?
Yes. So how have they told you? That shows something, doesn't it?
The very first time that I encountered a patient, it was entirely unplanned. I went to see a gentleman who had been involved in quite a prolonged resuscitation. He'd been in cardiac arrest for at least 15 minutes. He was clinically dead for 15 minutes.
Yep.
And we were very pleased to have reversed that process. And I went to see him. One of those brief moments, I had nothing better to do. I thought, I'll go and see this gentleman. As I walked towards him, this was a long time ago now, he had a face on him that suggested to me that he recognised me. He said, "Hello, how are you?" And he was very familiar. And I said to him, "I get a sense you understand, you know me." And he said, "Yes, I saw you at my resuscitation." And he described in very great detail the whole processes that were going on around him. And he can't have got that information from watching television, because on television it's largely inaccurate.
All right, okay, right, okay. Sorry. Who wants to go first? Tiny point. Deborah.
It's interesting, the definition of death, and that's exactly what it is. It's a definition. Who knows what it is? It might be a semantic thing. It doesn't necessarily mean there isn't activity that we can't detect. Also, to get a good statistical analysis of that, you would have to get all of the false positives. You would have to take loads and loads of stories and see which ones of them actually didn't happen, where they thought something happened in the operating theatre where it didn't. And third of all, even if you have very, you might not have sight, but if you have something like a sound, you can make a story from all sorts of clatterings. There was one I read on Pim van Lommel's paper where somebody had had their teeth taken out and they were put into a drawer. Now, if you can feel your teeth being taken out, you can hear a drawer being opened and you can hear a drawer being closed, it's reasonable for him to have then retroactively made up a story that fits that.
Well, Chris, what about this feeling of euphoria? Could that be a biochemical? I don't know. Chris French.
Yes, it absolutely could be. I mean, whenever there's kind of physical or even psychological stress, then the body really
in any sense, if whether you believe it or not, it's quite reassuring to know that when that point comes, we're going to feel, there's a feeling.
It is. I mean, I'm sure Ken will back up that there's a minority of cases where people have negative near-death experiences.
Very few, yes.
But it does happen. I mean, like this gentleman described at the beginning, some people don't get that happy ending. We're very glad you did.
Thanks for your contribution, by the way.
But I mean, the thing is,
it's good to see you here.
All of the different components of the near-death experience do occur in other contexts where we can have a better idea of what's going on in the brain. And essentially, it's this question of, is it a very rich, very profound, but hallucinatory experience?
One of the things that always occurs to me, we heard about the story about this kid Colton who went up and saw Jesus on a coloured pony and Mary and Joseph. Suppose he'd been a Jew. He'd have said,
well, he'd been in for a shock.
Who are these people? Okay, the point is that everybody has, it's the same as
their own
death experiences being written, or life after death stories coming from a particular cultural place. You have particular cultural references with death
point there, go on. Sorry, you had your hand up earlier. Quick point.
So when you die, it's not just you stop and then, there's still blood, there's still oxygen going in your brain. What if these experiences are things like your temporal lobes, which deal with memory? What if that's the connections dying and you remembering things, and that's the explanation? It's hormones that give you this euphoria, and it's actually quite a natural, nice death.
Yeah, that's what we kind of said. Venerable Choesang, nirvana. Let me move on to nirvana as we move to the end. Bliss. You reach this state of bliss. It's quite nice being alive. It can be great being alive. Why do we want to have this sort of state of floatiness? Why are we heading
there's a
towards
misunderstanding. Nirvana is actually living with equanimity, and it can be in this very lifetime.
Okay.
Whereas Buddhahood and Nirvana are different places. And Buddhahood is when you go out as an energy being after a death, and you don't have to be reincarnated. You can come back if you wish, but you don't have to.
But it's free from, you're free from birth.
Yes, free from a gross birth that we experience, and they can actually be out there at one with all the energy and work at an energetic level. And same from what others were saying earlier, the fact that if you're at an energetic level, we don't use all the concepts that we have here in a body. We could see and hear and think. It's kinesiology. It's all totally different. It all comes in a completely different way. We have a framework of how we discuss it now, but it wouldn't be the same framework that we would use for that particular experience.
Well, that was. No, we're finished. We're over. We've reached the point of nirvana on this particular debate. Thank you all very much indeed for your contributions. As ever, the debate will continue on Twitter and online. We're not on next week because of Whitsun, but we'll be back from Brighton on June the 15th for the last show of this series, so don't miss that, please. From now, it's goodbye from everyone here in Walsall. Have a really, really good Sunday. Thanks for watching The Big Questions.
Celebrating Pentecost Sunday with worship from the Birmingham Christian Centre, a special live programme next Sunday at 10 on BBC One. But next this morning, a back-to-front house is one of our homes under the hammer.